Hi guys, it's me ChazzaHD and welcome back to the channel after pretty much 1 month. We are back for the final, six races of the 2024 Formula One season, and there is still plenty to be decided. Obviously, the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, and still, surely, some exciting bits of racing and moments to come between now and the end of the season. But great to be back for qualifying here at the US Grand Prix, the Circuit of the Americas. What a racetrack this is, as we saw in the sprint race. If you didn't watch the sprint race, it was a pretty good one, actually. And I'll go through what the top eight was in a moment, and we'll get on to how the championship standings are affected by that, of course. But yeah, what a track to come back to. One of the most underrated, I think, tracks on the calendar, and usually one of the best in terms of consistently producing exciting race weekends. It never really fails to deliver, this Grand Prix. So really looking forward to a 4 week break. And yeah, I really hope this, I think next year we might have a similar break in the calendar around this time of year, which I'm not looking forward to next year, because I do think it has ruined the flow of the season. Though it would have been good to have maybe a race, maybe Singapore, maybe a week or so, or a couple weeks later than it actually was, just to even it out better. Because yeah, it just, the flow hasn't been as good. And I know, yeah, it gives the mechanics and all the team personnel, a good rest. And that is, a great thing. But I think it does ruin the flow a bit of the calendar, having the summer break in August, and then a month later, you're starting another 4 week break. It's not great, to be honest. But doesn't matter because it's over. And like I said, we have got 6 races to go between now and the second Sunday of December, which is the 8th of December, I believe, which will be the final race day of the season for Abu Dhabi. So, and that race is what? How many weeks away? 6 weeks away, I think that race is. So, well, no, it's not 6. It's not 6 weeks, is it? It's a bit more than that. It's what, 3, 4. I think 7. Is it 7 weeks? 7 or 8 weeks, something like that. And we've got 6 races to go. And of course, this is the beginning of a triple header. Next weekend, we're racing in Mexico City, and the race weekend after that, a week after that, is in Interlagos, Brazil, or in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So yeah, plenty of action coming our way, not just on the track, but here on this channel. Great to see you all back after what's felt like forever. I've been up to quite a bit since the last Grand Prix, obviously starting my 3rd year at university. And starting okay-ish, I would say. I'm doing my BA Honours degree year. And yeah, about a month in, I would say, so far. And yeah, it's going decent, I would say, so far. But we haven't really started properly doing the work so far. So yeah, we'll see how things are in a couple months from now. But yeah, really looking forward to getting into this. As I said, US Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas rarely fails to deliver. But I hope you guys are well, no matter what time zone you're in, what part of the world you're from. Hopefully you're all having a great Saturday. I've had a pretty good Saturday myself. And yeah, hopefully you'll be joining me in watching along qualifying here in Austin, Texas. But if you can't watch along, then you can always, of course, listen along to the stream, and I'll keep you absolutely bang up to date with everything going on track in Austin. But yeah, we have got plenty to go through before we get into qualifying. Of course, the usual build-up. But because we've already had a sprint race, and of course we had sprint qualifying yesterday, the data that we're going to be examining before we get into qualifying is going to be from sprint qualifying. And in a way, in terms of knowing what's going to happen, it's actually good that we've had a sprint qualifying session, because the pecking order, I don't think, and even looking at the sprint race, I don't think the pecking order is going to be that different from what we saw yesterday in sprint qualifying. That, of course, though, does mean that it does spoil a bit what the I guess it spoils the excitement of not knowing who's going to end up on pole position or who's going to end up in what positions, and who genuinely has the pace for pole and who genuinely doesn't have the pace for pole. And it spoils any maybe surprises for the weekend. And there has been a surprise or two so far this weekend, which we will get into. One more thing before I get into this build up, just want to say quickly, there is a poll running, of course, at the top of the live chat, where I've asked you guys who will take pole position for the United States Grand Prix. Your options in that poll are Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and George Russell. Let me know who you think takes pole for the US Grand Prix. But yeah, let's get into the build up here. But before we get into the data from sprint qualifying yesterday, let's just touch on the sprint race, which finished about, I think it was about 2 hours ago. It finished, and yeah, it was a good one. Even though I don't like sprint races, I will admit it was a pretty good one. And yeah, Max Verstappen ended up winning comfortably from Carlos Sainz, who finished second. He was on an absolute mission in that sprint race. I think he started, was it P5 or something like that, and ended up second. Brilliant overtake on his teammate on Russell, Norris. And yeah, brilliant job from Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris finishing in third. Lucky to finish in third, because with how poor he ended that sprint race, he probably should have ended up in fourth. So yeah, not great start to the weekend for Lando. Charles Leclerc fourth, George Russell fifth. Russell started on the front row, and then Mercedes suffering quite badly with tyre wear and overheating their tyres, rear tyres especially. So Russell ending up in fifth, Lewis Hamilton sixth, and then the two Haas's of Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg seventh and eighth. And that means, with Haas finishing in seventh and eighth, that they are now above Racing Bulls in the championship. Still level on points with Racing Bulls, but above them due to having a better best race result. But let's go on to those championship standings to see how they're affected, and not massively by the sprint race, but Max Verstappen does pull away by 2 points on Lando Norris. So the gap is 54 points going into tomorrow's Grand Prix. Of course, qualifying crucial for Norris if he's to, take any points away from Verstappen. Norris, I think, really today has to be at worst on the front row. Whether he can pull that off, though, with that car, not a sure thing, because McLaren are not looking that special this weekend, and we'll get more into that later on. Charles Leclerc third. He's only 35 points behind Lando Norris. Ferrari looked pretty good, I have to say, with their race pace in the sprint. Piastri fourth. He's had a pretty dreadful weekend. He ended up finishing in, I think, was it 10th or something? He started from, I think, was it 16th on the grid. We'll get into why that was later. And then Lewis Hamilton is, or not Lewis Hamilton, you've got Carlos Sainz in fifth, 40 points behind Piastri. Like I said, had a great sprint race. So they've got Lewis Hamilton sixth, George Russell seventh, Perez eighth, Alonso ninth, and Nico Hulkenberg now 1 point clear of Lance Stroll, and Hulkenberg P10. And then on the constructors' side, McLaren were outscored by Red Bull by a couple points. And McLaren, despite that, still comfortable enough, I would say, at the moment in the Constructors' Championship. They are what? Is it 39 points clear of Red Bull? So nothing to panic about with McLaren in terms of the Constructors' Championship. They've still got a comfortable enough hold on that. Red Bull, though, good to see them bouncing back a bit compared to the form they were showing just a couple races ago. Ferrari still in there, only 30 points behind Red Bull. Obviously, both drivers still scoring strongly for the Red Bull team. And then you got Mercedes in fourth, obviously going to finish there. Aston Martin obviously going to finish in fifth. And Haas now up to sixth. Again, level on points of Racing Bulls, but up to sixth. And given not only how quick they've been this weekend, but how quick they've been recently compared to Racing Bulls, I think it's pretty dead on at this point that Haas F1 are going to be finishing sixth of the championship, which is a fantastic result if they could get it, and a remarkable turnaround for that team after, of course, firing Gunther Steiner and putting Ao Komatsu in charge, and he's done an absolutely top job with that team to have them, at this point of the season, sixth of the championship, and probably will be finishing there. And not only sixth in the championship, but ending the season with the best midfield car, which is still a pretty good achievement when you've got teams like Aston Martin and Alpine in there who really should be ahead of teams like Haas and even Racing Bulls, you could say. So, yeah, superb by the Haas team. But that is how the championship is after that sprint race. But let's wash our hands with what happened in the sprint race and focus now on sprint qualifying, because sprint qualifying that took place yesterday does give us a very good idea as to the pecking order this weekend and what to expect in qualifying. So Max Verstappen just about took pole for the sprint race ahead of George Russell, 0.012 of a second only. He was quicker than Russell. Mercedes, I have to say, surprisingly very quick, but there is a reason for that, which I will get on to soon enough. But yeah, Mercedes, and we'll see with the sector time data, they have been consistently quick all weekend through the sectors. The only issue with the sprint race earlier was, again, overheating tyres, but their pace, even early on in the sprint race, looked good. It was just a tyre issue as to why their pace dropped off. Leclerc, third for Ferrari, just ahead of Lando Norris in the McLaren. McLaren very disappointing in qualifying for the sprint race yesterday. Carlos Sainz in fifth. Ferrari performing, I think, as well as probably you would have expected. I don't think really that many Ferrari fans coming to this Grand Prix would have expected them to be, say, on pole position or anything. I think third and fifth is something they would have been happy with for not just the sprint race in terms of the starting grid, but I think they'd be pretty happy with that, for starting tomorrow's race. So, yeah, I think that's about where you would expect Ferrari to be. And then very impressive performance by Nico Hülkenberg, who has been very quick here in the past. He's had some very good qualifying performances here in the past. I remember, I think, Force India once in 2016. Hülkenberg actually, I think, out-qualified the Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel. Or if he didn't, he got very close. I remember that weekend, him and Vettel were very close in qualifying, and people were rightfully, praising Hülkenberg for such an impressive performance. And yet again, very, very quick, and wasn't that far behind that Leclerc-Norris-Sainz battle there, and ended up a couple tenths of a second ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Now, we know Lewis Hamilton struggles in qualifying this year, but still, that is very impressive. And Kevin Magnussen, you can see, only just behind Hamilton by a couple hundredths of a second. So what it does confirm is not only are the two drivers performing well, but that Haas car is really in good shape. And again, there are reasons for that we'll get onto later. It's not just the pace they've had recently, but also some upgrades that they have brought this weekend. The last batch, I think, of upgrades for the season. Yuki Tsunoda did well to get his car into the top 10, and so did Franco Colapinto, out qualifying Albon in the sprint qualifying session. Colapinto was actually disappointed with what happened in sprint qualifying because he felt he could have had a better result if it wasn't for, I think, a setup issue that he had with his car. But still, incredibly impressive yet again by Franco Colapinto, who we know won't be at Williams next year, but increasingly is looking likely to be racing for Sauber next year ahead of Gabriel Bortoleto, another very good young driver. But Colapinto, with the performances he's putting in, I don't see why Sauber, who obviously are going to become Audi in 2026, I don't see why they wouldn't put him in their car for next year at this point. He has clearly proven, Colapinto, that he is good enough for Formula One. It's just a matter of him securing that full-time drive. But it's still up in the air, so we'll have to see what happens with that. And then for the rest of the order, Sergio Perez 11th, disappointing once again. Pierre Gasly 12th, did very well, Gasly, considering the Alpine is probably one of the slowest cars this weekend. Obviously, the two Aston Martins and Liam Lawson not doing a lap timing in SQ2 did help, but still was a good performance to get up to P12. The Alpine, by the way, the livery that they've got this weekend is so fucking annoying. I don't know what special occasion they're celebrating this weekend. I know back at Spa it was the Deadpool and Wolverine livery. This livery they've got this weekend, it looks like they're just copying McLaren. They've got a similar shade of orange on their car, and yeah, it just doesn't look good. So I'm not really keen, if I'm being honest, to be looking at the Alpine car too much this weekend. Aston Martin 13th and 14th, really poor for them, considering they have brought a lot of upgrades this weekend. Actually, they brought the most upgrades of any team this weekend. But from what we saw in the sprint race and sprint qualifying, we haven't seen anything yet to suggest those upgrades have done anything for that team. Lawson, obviously, back in the car after Daniel Ricciardo has been kicked out, and Daniel Ricciardo basically is done in Formula One, which sad but inevitable, I'm afraid. And then Oscar Piastri, 16th. The reason he was knocked down SQ1 was because the last lap time he did in SQ1 was deleted for a track limit violation, rightfully so, and he ended up in 16th. Decent effort he made in the sprint race to come back to, 10th place, I think, in the end. But yeah, he really compromised his sprint race massively with what he did in the sprint qualifying session. With Piastri, though, I think we saw this last year as well with him. This isn't a track that he's particularly quick around. So don't be expecting what we saw back in Baku, because I don't think we're going to be seeing that this weekend. Esteban Ocon 17th, bit surprised he was so poor. Normally he's pretty quick at this track. Alex Albon as well, surprised at his performance, ending up in 18th. Valtteri Bottas 19th, and Zhou Guanyu, what a shocking effort by him. 1.3 seconds slower than Valtteri Bottas, and 3.5 seconds off of sprint qualifying pole position. Nowhere near good enough. And somehow Zhou Guanyu, I read, was it yesterday, is still in discussions for the second seat at Sauber for next year. How? How? What has he done this year that could possibly convince anyone that he should be even in an F1 car? I don't get it. Uh, I, it is absolutely baffling to me how he's still in discussions. For me, it is a clear choice between Colapinto and Bortoletto. And I think probably going with Colapinto would be a smart decision for Sauber. But how Zhou is still involved in discussions is an absolute disgrace. Zhou Guanyu, I really hope, he's a nice guy and all that, but he ain't good enough for Formula One. And I really hope we see the back of him, at the end of this season, because I'm sorry, he's just not good enough Formula One driver. I'm sure he could have a decent career in maybe Formula E or WEC, depending on what team he raced for, but he's not Formula One level. He just isn't, and I really hope they can replace him for next season. But that's what happened in sprint qualifying. Let's go through the sector time data just to understand where certain teams are so quick and where certain teams are lacking. So sector 1 is all about downforce, and it's very similar to the middle sector at Silverstone. Obviously, you can tell the inspiration with the S's, and also the S's at Suzuka. You can see the inspiration as well. But like I said, all about downforce, and Mercedes, not just quickest in the first sector, but by a pretty good margin, over 1/10 of a second, they were quicker in the first sector. Red Bull lapping at a much better speed, which is good to see from them. McLaren, 3/10 of a second slower than Mercedes, and nearly 2/10 of a second slower than Red Bull. Clearly, there is issues at McLaren this weekend. They have brought some new upgrades, McLaren, that they were boasting of a few weeks ago that they were going to bring, but they haven't worked so far. You could see that in the sprint race where, they weren't that far off the pace of Red Bull, but they were not the formidable McLaren team we saw, in Singapore a month ago, where they absolutely destroyed the rest of the field. And based on that form, you would have expected coming here, they would be right up there at the top. Even if it was close with another team, you'd still expect them to be right there at the top. But yeah, there's clearly issues with that McLaren car. Obviously, Parc Ferme hasn't come into effect yet. That doesn't come into effect until the start qualifying. So there is time for McLaren to fix maybe whatever setup issues there are with that car. But we don't know if it is setup issues. It might just be that these new upgrades they put on the car just don't mesh with the rest of the car, or maybe the team don't know at the minute how to get the best out of those upgrades. Sometimes with upgrades, it does take a couple races to really get the best out of an upgrade package. It's not always an instant success as it is with other teams when it comes to upgrades. For example, Mercedes, looking very quick this weekend, they have brought upgrades and they have been, by the looks of it, an instant success. But like I said, that is not the case with every team. Certain teams need a couple races to bed these upgrades in, and then you start to see those upgrades actually working as intended. But there's no doubt about it, McLaren are on the back foot this weekend, and it's all because they just don't have the grip they previously had. And why that is, again, we don't know exactly, but I think setup related is part of it, but it could also be that the upgrades are just not, again, quite meshing how McLaren would have wanted at this point. Ferrari in the first sector, not really a surprise, them being the slowest of the front four teams. We know that their strength is not quite in the aero department compared to, say, McLaren and at times Red Bull. They are stronger in other areas of the track. And the middle sector certainly is a part of the track you would expect Ferrari to be quicker than they are in the first sector. But Mercedes, very encouraging. Again, that sprint race where they had their overheating tires, that was disappointing. But if you look at everything else we've seen this weekend from them, again, it's been encouraging. So if you're a Mercedes fan, don't get too disappointed, because I think fundamentally they've got something good there. They just need to work out a solution for not cooking their tires like they did in the sprint race. Because we saw in sprint qualifying, their pace was, with both drivers, pretty good. But yeah, those are the front four teams. And they've got Racing Bulls, best of the midfield, which is good to see from them, just ahead of Haas and Williams. Alpine, maybe you could have expected to be a slight bit stronger in the first sector. Aston Martin, though, definitely you would be expecting them to be stronger in the first sector. They should be a tenth and a half, probably at most, better off in this first sector. They should not be one of the worst teams through the first sector. That just should not be happening. And then a massive drop off to Sauber, who, as we've seen in the last few races, they easily have the worst car on the grid. There is, absolutely no doubt about it at this point. And as you'll see later, it gets even worse for Sauber in regards to their situation at the moment. In the middle sector, and the middle sector is not really that aero heavy. Obviously, you've got the end of the S's section, which is part of the middle sector. Then you've got a very long back straight, followed by some, a slow corner at, I think, is it turn 13? I think it is. So, really, I would say it's majority about power and also slow speed corner performance thrown in there as well. And Mercedes, who we have seen since their upgrades earlier in the season, they've improved a lot the efficiency of the Mercedes car in a straight line, and that is showing itself in this middle sector. Very good pace from them, and George Russell there quickest in the middle sector. McLaren, surprisingly, a lot better in the middle sector than they are the first sector as well. Their strength, McLaren, normally is in high-speed corners. The first sector is the highest speed sector of the track. So I don't get why McLaren are this much better in the middle sector when they should be at least this good in the first sector. So yeah, there's clearly something up at McLaren. Ferrari a bit better in the middle sector, but still not great. Probably would have hoped for a bit more pace there in the middle sector from Ferrari. I think they could probably do a bit better, maybe a tenth or so better in the middle sector. I think Red Bull, you could probably say that as well. But again, Mercedes looking very good in the middle sector. Haas also. Aston Martin, surprisingly good in the middle sector. Racing Bulls, decent. Bit of a drop off to Williams. Bit of a surprise at them being so slow in the middle sector compared to, say, Haas. And then a big drop off to Alpine and Sauber, which is, in this part of the track, not really a surprise. And then the final sector is a mix of high speed and mostly medium to slow speed corners. And it is a pretty tight final sector in terms of, it's always close between teams or certain teams in the final sector. And as you can see, incredibly close in the final sector it was in sprint qualifying. The exact same sector time done by Leclerc and Hulkenberg in the Ferrari and Haas, respectively. Very, very impressed by the pace of that Haas in the final sector. That's really why Hulkenberg ended up where he did in sprint qualifying, which was, sixth place in the end. And you can see George Russell only a couple thousandths of a second behind. And with Mercedes, it's a bit baffling with them that they ended up not getting pole position, because as a team, they were quicker than Red Bull in every sector. Yet Max Verstappen ended up on pole. And purely that's because George Russell wasn't as quick as his teammate was in the first sector in sprint qualifying yesterday. If Russell, of course, had done a similar time to Lewis Hamilton in the first sector, Russell would have been on pole by what? Probably a couple tenths of a second. So the pace of the Mercedes is genuinely good. It's just a matter of the drivers putting all the sectors together to end up, say, on pole position. So watch out for Mercedes-Benz today. They are, without doubt, a contender for pole position. As is, you could argue, all four of the top teams. It is that close. Red Bull, decent final sector. McLaren, again, you'd expect more in that final sector. Probably a tenth of a second more, at least, in that final sector. So, again, something up at McLaren. Then a big drop-off to the Williams team. How many tenths of a second? 2.5 tenths of a second off of McLaren. And then tenth of a second drop-off to Racing Bulls. Not a great final sector for them. And again, Aston Martin, no idea why they are this slow in the final sector. Not even just compared to Haas, but compared to Williams. A tenth and a half slower in a part of the track where it's all corners. That just can't be happening. It really cannot be happening. But there are bigger fundamental issues at Aston Martin that we already know about, but hopefully will be fixed for next year when Adrian Newey comes on board. Alpine, then second slowest, and Sauber the absolute slowest once again. But if we go back to the first sector times, again, Mercedes the best through there in sprint qualifying. Again, not just the best, but by a decent margin, considering it was only 24.8 seconds. And then also quickest in Sector 2 and pretty quick in Sector 3. Even though yesterday Mercedes ended up second, there is definitely an argument to be made that Mercedes could have the best car for qualifying today. And, people may say, well, look what happened in the sprint race. What happened in the sprint race really is irrelevant in terms of the issue that caused Mercedes to be slow. Because obviously, overheating tyres is not an issue, really, in qualifying. As long as you don't absolutely burn them out with, say, too aggressive of a warm-up lap, then again, overheating your tyres is not really an issue. So that's not going to be something that hampers them in qualifying today. And if that isn't, an issue, then there's no reason why Mercedes can't take pole position. But I do think with Red Bull that they have a bit more to show today than what they showed yesterday. So it's going to be close between Mercedes and Red Bull, but I think those are the two, for qualifying, the two fastest teams. But again, it will be very close between them, and also, Ferrari and McLaren. We have to factor them in to this battle. For qualifying, I'd probably say McLaren. I would go just ahead of Ferrari, purely because I think McLaren have just got a tad more downforce when it matters in certain parts of the track to be able to, to get ahead. of Ferrari on the grid, but it is very, very close, as we saw in the sprint race on pace. It is very close between those two teams, and it was in qualifying, in sprint qualifying yesterday. But I would say McLaren slightly ahead, but that doesn't mean that McLaren are, going to be, that doesn't mean McLaren are going to be on, not on pole position. It doesn't mean McLaren are going to be ahead of Ferrari, because if Leclerc or Sainz pull out a really great lap, then that could still end up, putting them ahead. But yeah, I would go Red Bull and Mercedes, I would say about equal on pace. Maybe you could probably say Mercedes ahead of Red Bull, but I think Red Bull will be better today in qualifying in terms of how quick they are compared to the other teams, compared to what they were like yesterday in sprint qualifying. So yeah, those two at the top. McLaren third, Ferrari fourth, but those two again very, very close. And then fifth best, I would probably go Haas. Actually, definitely Haas. They've been clearly the best of the rest. And then sixth, Racing Bulls. Seventh, Williams. And then eighth, Aston Martin, which is, again, surprising for me to say that, but I think that's the reality of where they're at, despite all the upgrades they brought. And then Alpine ninth and Sauber 10th, those two definitely the two slowest teams. But when it comes to the four front running teams, it is incredibly close. And given the possibility of mistakes or drivers not quite doing their best laps in Q3, I think really any team could end up on pole position here. I really do think that. So, yeah, it's going to be very, very close. But let me get into my predictions for qualifying. Qualifying coming up, by the way, in just over 45 minutes' time. And here is my prediction for qualifying. I think Max Verstappen, who is having a top weekend and has always been super quick here at the Circuit of the Americas, will take pole position just ahead of George Russell. Lando Norris, I think, will end up in third, with Leclerc fourth, Sainz fifth, Lewis Hamilton, I'm going in sixth, Oscar Piastri, I'm going in seventh again. Piastri not very quick around this track, and also McLaren not very quick, or not very quick compared to how we expected. And then Nico Hulkenberg, I'm going in eighth, with Sergio Perez, I think, splitting the two Haases, with Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with that prediction, and we'll get into your thoughts ahead of qualifying very, very soon. I will, of course, come to the comment section to see what you guys have to say very soon. But yeah, quickly before we get into any more stuff, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, because, of course, tomorrow I will be live to cover the race. Race Watchalong will be going live at 6 p.m. UK time. So make sure to join me for that. 2-hour build-up, of course, and then the race starts at 8 p.m. UK time. And I'll do a slight reaction afterwards as well. Just to announce as well, unfortunately, sorry about that. Unfortunately, Niblo, my co-commentator, won't be able to join me tomorrow night. Next time he'll be on might be for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix in a couple weeks, which might be at a better time for him. I'm not sure. We'll see about that. But he will definitely be back on, of course, before the end of the season, because we've got races in Qatar and Abu Dhabi, which definitely are at better times for him. But yeah, looking forward to the race tomorrow and to this qualifying session coming up. But a couple more things to get into. And but yeah, before qualifying, one of those things is going through all of the upgrades the teams have brought, and 8 of the 10 teams have brought upgrades for this Grand Prix weekend. Red Bull, all they've brought is a new floor edge, and I think this new upgrade they were bringing here, them, I guess the impact of this upgrade maybe is being overstated in terms of Red Bull's return to form. I think, and I said this a few weeks ago, that I think more of an issue with the Red Bull car wasn't necessarily lack of upgrades, it was the setup of the car itself. And when Red Bull get set up right, they tend to be a lot quicker and as quick as we would expect them to be. If you go and look at, races where Max Verstappen has struggled, for example, Monza, Baku, Hungary, it's been setup related as to why Max has had issues at those particular race weekends. So, and it does feel a long time ago, the start of this season, but if we go back to the start of this season, you have to remember that Red Bull, were absolutely destroying everyone and winning all of the races. So fundamentally, the car is good. Again, they just needed to figure out, a type of setup that worked in bringing the car back to the performance level that we saw, not even at the start of the season, but, say back at Imola or, Montreal, where Red Bull obviously won those particular races. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of Red Bull's improvement this weekend, I think, again, it's more setup related than it is because of upgrades or anything like that. For Mercedes, though, their improvement no doubt is upgrade related. A new floor edge and a new front wing, front suspension and floor fences. As we've been talking about in the last few races, Mercedes have not really brought a lot of upgrades to the car, but clearly they were saving the last big upgrade package for as late as they could, and here it has come at the US Grand Prix, and it has given them quite a bit extra lap time than they had before. They are probably half a second quicker than they were, say, back in Singapore. So this puts Mercedes back in a position, no doubt, where they're contending for podiums again, but maybe even race wins. Just depends on the particular race weekend, and again, if they have a good enough race pace and stuff like that. So Mercedes are definitely back in the fight for race wins. There's no doubt about that, and at least back in the fight for pole positions. If they do win another race this season, we'll have to see what that race is, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Mercedes do win another race this season. Now I've seen this improved pace from this upgrade. For McLaren, big upgrade for them as well. The last big upgrade of the season. New front wing, new front suspension, new front corner and rear corner. McLaren were talking a few weeks ago that they still had, quite a bit on the pipeline with, in terms of their upgrades. But so far, we have not seen any improvement from these upgrades. So again, maybe there's a setup issue. Maybe they're just not working. Maybe they need a couple more races to really learn how to get the best out of them. We'll have to see. But so far, they're not performing to standard, to the standard we've seen as of late. So plenty to work on if you're a McLaren engineer and McLaren driver. And maybe we'll see a bit more pace in qualifying that will represent an improvement they found, in between the sprint race and the qualifying session with, say, the setup of the car. But again, at the moment, we haven't seen the fruition of these upgrades. And neither have we for Aston Martins, and you can see a lot of upgrades for them. New front wing and front wing end plate, new engine cover, new floor body, new floor edge, and a new diffuser. Pretty much a new car in terms of upgrades, but we haven't really seen much of them this weekend in terms of, highlight lap times and them being in the top 10 that much or anything like that. So who knows what these upgrades have done to their car. I'm just hoping they've improved the car to any degree, because as we've seen with this team, upgrades are just, new parts for this car is like an allergy. They just never seem to work. So we'll have to wait and find out, but I'm not going to get my hopes up with Aston Martin. An upgrade package of this size, though, if it was to fully work, it should give them probably an extra half a second per lap, which would surely put them clearly, as the best team in the midfield, and not that far away from the front runners. But if you look at what we saw in the sprint race, they were back markers at times. So again, it's really hard to get a read on Aston Martin, but I guess we'll find more out in this qualifying session coming up in about 45 minutes time. Alpine, also new upgrades, new floor body and floor edge, new engine cover and new rear wing. Also, though, we haven't seen any real improvements with them, so yeah, that's disappointing. Maybe we'll see a bit more from them in qualifying. I hope we do. But we haven't seen anything of these upgrades so far to suggest that Alpine have legitimately improved. Racing Bulls, just a new floor body for them. Sauber, a new upgrade package, yet they are still just as bad, which just sums up the Sauber team in 2024, that no matter what upgrades they bring, this car is utter shit. But the upgrades they have brought, new front wing, new front and rear suspension, and a new rear corner, but as I said, seemingly has done nothing to improve the pace of the car. And finally, Haas F1, who have been decently quick as of late. The reason they're even quicker this weekend is because of this new upgrade, new side pod inlet, new floor fences, new floor body and edge. So pretty much a new floor and new side pod inlet. And clearly working, because they, not just the quickest midfield team, but they've looked closer to the front runners than they have to the midfield pack behind them. So very encouraging from Haas. And if they can keep up that level of performance for the rest of the season, then definitely they will finish sixth in the championship, because they will score points probably on a regular basis if they keep up this performance level until the end of the season. So looking good on the American front. But let me come back to this and get the timer back on screen, as we have got 40 minutes to go until qualifying begins in Austin, Texas. And yeah, hopefully that build-up gave you enough information to know what probably should happen in this session. But as usual, you never truly know what is going to happen. Plenty of surprises we've had this season in qualifying, and I'm sure we will get more today. But yeah, for the next 40 minutes, guys, make sure to post your comments in the chat, and I'll get to as many of them as I can in the next 40 minutes. Make sure, by the way, to smash a like button. Obviously, does help the channel grow. Helps me also know that you guys do actually enjoy the content. So make sure, like I said, to smash that like button. And how many likes are we on at the moment? 21 likes. So yeah, let's try and get up to 30 plus likes if we can in the next half an hour. That'd be great if we could do that. But right. Let me go to the start of the chat. I do, and I should have probably said this at the start of the stream, but I do have to warn you guys, in view to tomorrow's stream, physically I don't feel that great, and I do feel like I'm coming down with an illness. It's not bad enough that I can't do this stream. Obviously, I'm gonna complete this stream. I'm just saying, obviously, when I wake up tomorrow, I don't know how I'm going to feel. I might feel 10 times worse. I hope I don't, but you don't know, how illnesses work. It might be slow moving or it might hit me like a ton of bricks. So I'm just saying that in case of worst case scenario that I would have to cancel the stream tomorrow. From how I feel right now, I don't see myself cancelling the stream tomorrow at all. Because if I feel this way tomorrow, then I'll definitely be doing the race watch along. But again, you just don't know how illnesses day to day will progress. So we'll see how I feel when I wake up. But if I feel like I do now, then yeah, definitely I'm going to be live tomorrow. But just a pre-warning in case the worst case scenario does happen, so that people don't say that are, without warning, I've cancelled the stream. But, right. Let's get into your comments. And make sure, by the way, if you haven't already, to vote in the poll at the top of the live chat. We've had already well over 100 votes in that poll, and that poll will keep running probably for another hour and 20 minutes. So if you want to wait until after, say, Q1 or Q2 to make your decision, then that's absolutely fine. But yeah, it will. The point I'm making is you've got plenty of time before having to make your decision. Hello to Todd, Will, Yvonne. Hello to everyone. Hope you're all doing well. And Yvonne saying, "Hi, Tessa. How are you, friend?" Yeah, okay. Again, physically not feeling that great, but I've had a good day today. Earlier went out and watched my local football team win, which was good, and it was cracking weather as it's been in the UK today. And then came home, set the stream up, and obviously been looking forward to coming back to streaming. So great to be back here. And like I said earlier, uni I started, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and yeah, so far that's going decent, I would say. And probably in the next week or so on that course, I'm gonna be properly ramping up in terms of starting the pieces of work that obviously I'm going to be handing in a few months' time. So just getting to that point where your proposals are being done and all of that stuff. Todd says, I hope you can get to the bump to Red Bull Racing next year. Need to see what you can do in a better car. What has been encouraging is in the last couple of weeks we've heard genuine talk of Red Bull maybe thinking about Yuki Tsunoda, and there was even a thing earlier today I saw about Honda apparently trying to persuade Red Bull to give Tsunoda a chance. They should have been considering Tsunoda a year ago, more than a year ago, because Yuki Tsunoda has been performing at a good level for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years maximum, because he did have a decent end to the year of 2022. So, this is not new information. It's just, it's frustrating that it's taken this long for them to even consider Sonoda. And I know, I know that a big reason for it is obviously the Honda thing, and um, you know, Red Bull and Honda are not going to be partners in 2026. And the only reason really Sonoda was put into the AlphaTauri back in 2021 is because of Honda. Those things are true, but you know, he still should be given a chance, because, what if he is the solution to their number two driver problem? Something, that's been a problem for them since Daniel Ricciardo left. And, just keeping Sergio Perez in that team is not really a solution to that problem. The only way they're going to solve that problem is by getting through drivers and eventually finding that driver that ends up being that consistent number two driver for them. So, absolutely, he should be given a chance. But whether he will actually get a chance, I wouldn't get ahead of myself. If I was a Sonoda fan. Greetings, Chazza. Me too. Have you back? Cheers for that. Willifon says McLaren would win both championships easily if they had two drivers performing properly. Well, they're still in the lead of the Constructors' Championship, so, they're going to, and I think they are going to win the Constructors' Championship, even with this rebound in performance we're seeing with Red Bull. I think McLaren should still win the Constructors' Championship. And then, what do you call it? On the driver's side, yeah, Lando Norris, it's something we'll talk about at the end of the season. The missed opportunity that potentially has been 2024 for Lando Norris. Todd says Franco and Sainz should be Williams drivers next year. It is funny how, and I don't know if this is because Albon is suddenly feeling like the pressure a bit of having a teammate that's actually competitive with him, but it is funny to see that, not only has Colapinto come in and performed as well as he has, but he is, not always, but at certain points, he has been outperforming his teammate Alex Albon, who's, pretty experienced, I would say, at this point in Formula One. But one thing, and we're not going to find this out yet with Albon, we'll find this out, I think, next year for sure, when Albon has to be teammates with Carlos Sainz. But, and this is a legitimate thing to consider, and this is something I've always considered with Albon, despite his impressive performances and results at times, is, did the really bad teammates he had in Latifi and Logan Sargent, did it make Albon look quite a bit better than he actually is? I think yes, but not like totally. I think yes, a bit is what I would say. But again, next year we'll find out truly how good Alex Albon really is. If Alex Albon next year, hands down beats Carlos Sainz fair and square, then Alex Albon, you'd have to say, is one of the top 10 best drivers in Formula One. But if Carlos Sainz comes in and absolutely batters him, then I think at that point you'd have to say that Alex Albon is quite overrated and is definitely not anywhere near to being one of the top 10 best on the grid. So next year is a very interesting year for Alex Albon and where he sits in Formula One. Because as well, if he beats Carlos Sainz, that massively helps his case for getting back to, say, Red Bull or maybe racing for Mercedes in the future as a number 2 driver or whoever. So, again, it is a massive year for Alexander Albon. My prediction, I think Carlos Sainz will beat Albon. I don't think he'll destroy Albon, but I think he'll beat him enough to the point where we will consider Albon overrated and not quite as good as we all thought he was. Yanni says, hi, Chaz, it's been a while. You just coughed. Should I run and get my mask? Not yet. Yanni saying maybe they got a deal to build the cars in China. Obviously, he's referencing the, Zhou still being in talks with Sauber, who, of course, are now, basically being run by Audi at this point. I mean, that was one big reason that was given by, I think, was it Tomo, the F1 YouTuber? I think he gave that as a big reason for why Audi would look to keep him, Zhou Guanyu on board, is because it would help, the sales of their cars in that market. The thing is, though, is before Audi took over Sauber, or it was announced they were going to, they were already selling selling a good amount of cars in that market before there was a partnership possibly on hand. So I don't think they need Zhou Guanyu's help in selling more cars in China, because if you actually look, again, before they announced that, I think, partnership between, Audi and Sauber, or, Audi taking over Sauber, Audi were already, again, doing well in that market. So I don't think they need, the presence of Zhou Guanyu to sell more cars. I don't think that's the case. And ultimately, Audi, if you look at what they've done in other motorsport series, they do tend to be a pretty serious team. They're not a team that's going to come and take the piss. So I think they'll go for probably Colapinto in that car. And, given the current level of performance we're seeing, that lineup next year of Hulkenberg and Colapinto sure is better than what they've got right now. But one thing I'll do quickly before we go any further is let me just post a link of the stream back out, and then we'll get onto more of your comments for the next, say, 20 minutes. So let me just post this link back out. Come join us in watching along what is set to be a very exciting qualifying session in Texas. And there you go. So, yeah, we'll go through your comments for another 20 minutes, and then we'll get onto a couple final things before we get into qualifying. This build-up, I have to say, is absolutely whizzed by. So, yeah, qualifying will be here in just a moment. Josiah says, one thing you forgot to mention about Hamilton's sprint qualifying result yesterday is he was 4/10 up on Russell before he ran into a yellow flag. He would have got pole otherwise. Yeah, I did forget to mention that. Lewis Hamilton was having a fantastic final lap and then yellow flag. So, I mean, Lewis's pace in the sprint race wasn't really that great, but the potential was there clearly in sprint qualifying, but ultimately the lap time that maybe was possible wasn't realised because, yellow flag cost him. Let me see if I can find some other good comments here. Keep scrolling. As Derogara and Will F1 having quite a conversation in the chat. Andrew De Villiers, I think it might be. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Says the floor upgrade that Red Bull Racing bring to Austin wasn't the speculation that the floor is the 2025 floor. Sacrifice the 2025 floor to help Max win the 2024 championship. I don't know if this floor is supposed to be a floor that is for 2025, but I think, and Max, there were quotes from him back in, like, I think, was it Monza or might have been Baku around that time, very early September, where Max was talking about how the Red Bull engineers, know what the issue is and think they can sort it. And I think the upgrade they've brought here is more to do with fixing the issues they've had recently rather than in view to next year. And again, I think a lot of their improvement is setup related, combined obviously with the upgrade, doing its work as well. But yeah. Let me find some other comments here. Good to see Rook in the chat. Hopefully you're doing well. Let me just scroll up a bit. Who really cares about the constructors, says the Woden. I mean, yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, normally the Constructors' Championship never, nothing really ever tends to happen with it. But I think if you look at it this year, I mean, you've got the top three teams within 100 points of one another. That's the closest it's been in the Constructors' Championship for a very long time. So I think it's because we've just got used to the Constructors' Championship not really mattering. But I think it matters. And it is something to care about because it is vitally important to the teams. And with how still relatively close it is, there's still plenty to be decided. Laurie Rastogi asking, Chazza, who do you think will sign for the stake kick me up the arse team? Yeah, I think it'll be Colapinto alongside Hulkenberg. Williff wants us, Chazza, who do you think will drive the Visa Cash App Maxi Tampon RB in 2025 if Tsunoda or Lawson get the Red Bull seat? If Tsunoda gets the seat at Red Bull, then we could see Daniel Ricciardo making a return possibly into the Racing Bulls car, because there's not an obvious choice for who they would put into the Racing Bulls car if Tsunoda or Lawson, get promoted up to Red Bull. I don't think Sergio Perez will accept being demoted into a Racing Bulls car. If Perez gets dropped by Red Bull, he'll be dropped completely. I don't see him racing for Racing Bulls at all. So, yeah, we could see Ricciardo come back into the fray. I know they've got a couple drivers they like in their academy, but, are they actually ready to be Formula One drivers? I'm not sure. They've got Isaac Hadjar, who I know they like in terms of what he does as a test driver. But, again, would he be good enough to be a Formula One driver? I don't think so. And then you've got Pepe Marti, who's an interesting talent. So, what do you call it? Yeah. Like I said, if, say, Tsunoda goes to Red Bull, then I could see it being Lawson and Ricciardo at Racing Bulls. But I don't think Red Bull are going to take out Sergio Perez. If they were going to take him out, they would have done it already, because it's obvious at this point Sergio Perez is not performing well enough for what Red Bull need. So why wouldn't they have taken him out of the car, back at summer break? I think the answer at this point is probably money that they're getting from, is it Carlos Slim and all the sponsorship money that Sergio Perez brings. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to drop Perez until probably Perez decides to probably quit himself. But one thing I will say is, if Sergio Perez does remain at Red Bull for next year will definitely be his final year at Red Bull, and possibly his final year in Formula One. I think maybe Perez might do a year in the midfield team in 2026, but I would be very surprised if Perez is still a Red Bull driver in 2026. Very surprised. So, yeah, we'll see on that front. But I think Sergio Perez, there's a good chance that this time in 2 years from now, Perez will be basically at the end of his F1 career, if not already finished. So, not too much longer, I think, Sergio Perez, until he, comes to the point where he probably retires. Next year at the Mexico City Grand Prix might be a good place to announce it, that he's retiring. We'll see. But again, if he stays in the Red Bull for next year will definitely be his last year as a Red Bull driver. 100%. No way Red Bull keep him in 2026. But let's just find a few other comments here. The Woden says Sainz is probably going to smoke Albon. Will F1 saying Jazza predicted State kicked me up the arse Sauber to finish 7th this year. Yeah, I don't understand why I predicted them to finish that high. For some reason, in testing, I thought they were good, but they weren't. Looney Classics says Albert was made to look better by weak teammates. Magnussen looks superb against Mazepin, but look at him now. Was Magnussen ever teammates with Mazepin? I think you might mean Mick Schumacher, because I don't think Mazepin and Magnussen were ever teammates. And thank God they weren't, because imagine the cost of damage if they were teammates for a year. But yeah, I get what you mean with Magnussen when he was teammates with Mick Schumacher. But until that's the thing, isn't it? Until there's evidence to prove that a driver is maybe not as good as we think they are, you have to hold fire. You can't just think, oh, well, they're not actually that good. We need to see evidence of that. And I think, again, with Alex Albon, next year we will find out truly how good he is. Because Carlos Sainz, I think, is the best test, realistically, he's going to have whilst being a Williams driver. And if he does beat Carlos Sainz, then I think he'll find his way to a top team again. Francisco says Audi dominated both prototype and GT endurance racing for years, but in recent years they've been in shambles. I don't have high hopes for that F1 effort. Well, I think one key issue already with their F1 effort that's going to be a problem is obviously Sauber right now are awful, and Audi are going to be taking over a very underperforming Formula One team. And that isn't a great way to start. I mean, it's better still for me than how Toyota came into Formula One. Talking of Toyota, by the way, how great is it that new partnership between Haas and Toyota beginning next year? New technical partnership between the two. And maybe Toyota, say, not 2026, but maybe by 2030, maybe Toyota will come back. That's good to hear that those two are in a technical partnership. But yeah, Toyota, when they came into Formula One, they just started their own team. They didn't bother taking over an existing team, which in hindsight, Toyota should have bought an existing team. If if Toyota had bought the Prost team or Arrows, then I think Toyota would have started off way better than they actually were, and probably could have been maybe more of a success. So, Audi are doing better in that aspect, but again, they're taking over a very underperforming team. If Audi were taking over the Haas team, then I would have good hopes for them. But yeah, Sauber, as we can see, are not getting the most out of what they've got. Let me see if we can find some other comments here. As we've got, just under 10 minutes now to go. Bottle Job FC says, good evening, Chazza. Seems like McLaren have dropped the ball this weekend with their upgrades. Yep, it does. But maybe, again, because we have to remember that obviously, since the sprint race, there is, there's still time to fix the setup until Parc Ferme comes into effect in about 10 minutes' time. So maybe they've fixed that to a degree with a new setup. Um, Let me find a couple more comments here. Bottle FC says Audi is the most obvious flop. We saw how Toyota and Ford flopped, and even BMW to an extent after fumbling 2008. I mean, we can't sit here and say Audi are a flop. They haven't even been in a race yet, and obviously, they're going to have their own power unit. It's going to be a works team. Who knows how competitive they're going to be in 2026? They've never been in Formula One. Never been in Formula One. And they've not even been an engine supplier. So it is totally new ground. But at the minute, I would have to say my hopes are not that high, purely because of the team they're taking over. But I mean, we've seen with certain regulation changes that one team, can be hopeless in one year, and then the next year, when there's a new set of regulations, be really, really quick. I mean, look at Haas, for example. In 2021, Haas were at the back of the grid, deliberately didn't upgrade their car because they were working on the 2022 car for the new 2022 regulations. And then the new regulations came around and they had probably the best car in the midfield for the first probably 8 to 10 races of the season and were pretty competitive that year. And since 2022, you have to say they've been pretty competitive. So, Sauber, who will become Audi, that might happen to them. Next year, they might deliberately be hopeless purely so they can be amazing or a lot better in 2026. So, we'll have to see. But I will admit, I am looking forward to 2026 because it is a complete reset on the regulations. Not just the aerodynamic and the chassis regulations, but also the engine. Obviously, that's the big difference that we're going to have in 2026. And, so many different engine manufacturers on the grid, and it'll be fun to find out who comes out good and who doesn't. And the engine manufacturers we've got will be Mercedes, Ferrari, no longer Renault, Alpine looking to be powered, I think, by Mercedes for 2026, which is just so embarrassing. But Renault, but yeah, you've got Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull powertrain, also assisted by Ford. Obviously Honda, Audi. So yeah, 2026 is going to be, I think, a properly exciting season. And pre-season testing especially is going to be so exciting. Especially if they keep it to only 3 days of testing, because there'll be such little testing for the teams to, even for themselves, to find out how good they are. But thanks, guys, for posting your comments, as the F1 intro is now playing and it's now time to get into qualifying in Austin, Texas. Make sure to keep posting the comments though, because I will read out the occasional one as we go along. Make sure to keep voting in the poll in the live chat. Still going to be active. That will be for another 45 minutes or so. And make sure as well to keep smashing the like button. We're on 31 likes. Let's try and get up to 40 likes in the next half an hour if we can. If you haven't hit the like button yet, make sure to do so. But let's get into a couple final things before we get into this session. And a reminder, after the sprint race of the championship standings, Max Verstappen pulling away by a couple points in the sprint race, so he is now 54 points clear of Lando Norris. And those 2 points, you don't know, they might be very key in winning the championship for Verstappen. Lando Norris in second, Leclerc third, Piastri fourth, Sainz fifth, Hamilton sixth, Russell a bit closer to his teammate in seventh, Perez eighth, Alonso ninth, and Nico Hulkenberg a point clear of Lance Stroll in 10th. On the constructors' side, McLaren still in the lead by 39 points, which is comfortable enough for them. Red Bull in second, 30 points clear of Ferrari, who are still a factor in the Constructors' Championship fight. Mercedes fourth, Aston Martin fifth, Haas now up to sixth, but still level on points with Racing Bulls. Williams in eighth, Alpine ninth, and Sauber still pointless in 10th. But let's get on to the front-running teams and some stats regarding them. Now, it says that Red Bull took pole at last year's US Grand Prix, but I remembered later on that actually they didn't, so sorry about that. But it was actually Ferrari with Charles Leclerc who took pole position at the US Grand Prix. Verstappen has actually took only one pole position at the Circuit of the Americas. Obviously, the pole he had for the sprint race does not count. So, yeah, the just one pole for Max here at the Circuit of the Americas. Back in 2021, that was. Max's last pole position, though, in Formula 1 was 8 races ago in Austria. And for Ferrari, they have took pole in the last 2 years here at the Circuit of the Americas. Leclerc last year and Sainz the year before. And 2 poles only for Ferrari here at the Circuit of the Americas in their history. Their last pole position was just 2 races ago in Baku. For Mercedes, their last pole at the Circuit of the Americas was in 2019 with Valtteri Bottas. Mercedes have done very well here in the past. They've started on pole 5 times here since 2015, but their last pole position was 7 races ago at Silverstone. And for McLaren, they've never started on pole here at the Circuit of the Americas. Lando Norris has taken, though, 3 of the last 4 pole positions on offer in Formula 1, and McLaren have started on pole in 4 of the last 6 races. They are the team most in form in qualifying. Will it remain that way? Let's find out. As Q1 will be underway in the next probably 30 seconds or so. 18-minute long session. I'll sync up the timer at the 17-minute mark. And this, you can see the picture of the Alpine on the screen. Initially, you think it's a McLaren, but then you see the BWT stickers. I hate it. Absolutely hate it. But unfortunately, they have decided to go for that livery. So that's the way it is. As all the cars queued up at the exit of pit lane, possibly because of rain that might be in the area, as qualifying 1 has begun and now the cars will filter out onto the track. One thing they did show on the during the F1 intro was the tyres. The tyres this weekend are the C4, C3, and C2. Big tyre difference in terms of the lap time delta between the C4 to the C3 and then the C3 to the C2. There's about a 1 second a lap difference between the C4 and the C3, and then between the C3 and the C2 you're looking at about 1.2 seconds. So everyone is going to be using a set of soft tyres. No one's going to go for the mediums because you'll just be way too slow on them. As yeah, all the cars slowly coming out as an Aston Martin there. I think Alonso diving down the inside of the Racing Bulls car at turn one. He had a bit of trouble with a Racing Bulls car in what do you call it, in the sprint race with Liam Lawson. I think he called Lawson an idiot. And Lawson certainly was aggressive in his defending against Alonso, but Alonso pretty fed up in that Aston Martin considering how the season has transpired. But one other thing to look out for is, of course, the sprint qualifying pole position yesterday was a 132.8. Should be quicker today because obviously more rubber on the track. I would say probably a 132.2 or a 132.3 is about what I'm expecting for pole position today. I'd be very surprised if we got a 1 minute 31. But yeah, if you could do a 132.3 or lower, then if you're not on pole, you're going to be very close. But here is Alex Albon on the TV broadcast starting his first lap of qualifying. He was 18th in sprint qualifying with his teammate doing so well in sprint qualifying. Surely that must act as motivation for Albon, with him knowing that Q3 is possible in a Williams car that has been very competitive as of late. As Albon onto the back straight now. And DRS wide open on a very long back straight where they reach about 325 to 330 kilometers an hour. As Albon just coming through turn 14, 15, and yeah, he's backed off on this lap, Albon. Not sure why. Didn't see any obvious mistakes. Maybe it just doesn't feel like the tyres are there as of yet. As he's, yeah, just gonna... Was he coming back into the pit lane? Interesting. Maybe wants maybe a tweak of front wing or something, but I'm surprised he didn't go for another run there just to get a time on the board. As Zhou Guanyu sets the first lap time of qualifying. And it's a 1:35.4, which is very slow. Esteban Ocon now goes quickest on a 1:34.9. Now Valtteri Bottas goes quickest on a 1:34.7. Again, though, these lap times probably about 2 to 2.5 seconds off what pole position will be. Fernando Alonso now quickest on a 1:34.4. As Gasly is in 5th. As we're looking at Lando Norris coming through the final corner, he's done a purple middle sector. And Norris does a 1:34.0, which is not that good of a lap time. And Carlos Sainz goes second. So either the track is not quite as grippy as expected, or these are just bad lap times, as Leclerc does a 1:34.9 and goes 5th. That is a very poor lap time. And goes behind Valtteri Bottas as Piastri sets his first time and goes 3rd. As Gasly, I think, has had a time deleted, and we're going to see a replay now of, not sure if it's where the deletion came, but it's of him locking up and oversteering at turn 1, and according to AWS, he lost 0.8 of a second doing that. as the Alpine does a slow-mo of it, bouncing quite a bit through the S's. But yeah, the best lap time I would expect for Q1 would be probably a mid 133, maybe a 133.2, something like that at best. And Max Verstappen certainly on his way to doing that. Half a second quicker than Lando Norris in the first sector alone. And you could tell by watching the Red Bull on board yesterday with the sprint pole he did, that Red Bull is a lot more back to how it should be. And that's why the form has reversed. As Verstappen braking hard into turn 12. And still half a second up on Norris after the first two sectors. So this should be a 133.5 for Verstappen. And this lap time probably good enough to get him through already to Q2 without having to do another lap. As he comes through turn 19, nowhere near extending track limits. Into the final corner of turn 20. And loses a bit in the final sector. But he still does a 133.6, which is a pretty quick first run. And Sergio Perez matches exactly the lap time Lando Norris has done. So Perez in third. As we've had someone else having their lap time deleted. Leclerc has had their lap time deleted. So only 9 lap times on the board so far. Oh God. Accidentally moved the order there. Was not supposed to do that. There you go. Supposed to move the picture. There you go. That's better. As we're looking on board from the front wing on the TV broadcast of George Russell, who very well could have took pole position for the sprint race. So could have his teammate. Let's find out just how quick Mercedes are and whether they've lost anything compared to yesterday. Oh, Russell not very quick in the middle sector. 4/10 off Verstappen as Colapinto goes up to 4th place with Alex Albon, his teammate, in 5th. As Hulkenberg gets the time on the board and goes up to 2nd with a 1:33.8. Pretty good lap time there for Hulkenberg. Here comes George Russell, who only goes 10th on a 1:34.2. That is a poor run for Russell. And not any better for Hamilton, who does a 1:35.1. So poor first runs there for the team Mercedes. But it's Verstappen, Hulkenberg, Norris, Perez, Colapinto, Albon, Sainz, Magnussen in 8th. As Pierre Gasly goes quickest for Alpine on a 1:33.5. Where has that come from? Gasly quickest. As Lawson goes up to 4th for Racing Bulls. And Tsunoda, his teammate, goes 5th. Good to see Liam Lawson back at the track. Clearly deserves his place on the grid. Yeah, it's now Gasly, Verstappen, Hulkenberg, Lawson, Tsunoda, Ocon now in 6th. And then, or in 5th actually, because Tsunoda has had another lap time deletion. So it's Ocon 5th and then Norris, Perez, Colapinto, Albon, Sainz in 10th. Lance Stroll is now 11th, with Kevin Magnussen in 12th. Alonso 13th. Piastri 14th. Valtteri Bottas 15th. And then the two Mercedes cars of Russell and Hamilton in the drop zone, 16th and 17th. And then Zhou in 18th, and then Tsunoda and Leclerc yet to do a lap time that doesn't violate the track limits. But Leclerc is on a lap. And so is Carlos Sainz. And we just watched Carlos Sainz go through the S's from the rear cam. And it looked very, very on edge. But he got through it. And has actually done a purple middle sector. So let's see if Sainz can get a 1:33.3 or 1:33.2. Leclerc going 0.3 of a second quicker than Carlos Sainz through the middle sector. As Sainz races his way through the final two corners. And Carlos Sainz to the line. Doesn't go quickest, lost a lot of time in the final sector. Couple tenths of a second. Leclerc, though, does a 1:33.2 and goes quickest. The Ferrari not quite as strong in the final sector as it is in the middle sector, but that's not a surprise. The middle sector is where the Ferrari should be at its best. As Piastri only goes 7th, 3/4 of a second behind Leclerc. McLaren not showing anything so far. Let's see what Lando Norris has for us with 5 minutes to go in Q1. 4th and almost 0.4 off the pace. So yeah, McLaren not showing anything so far, but it is only Q1. But it's now Leclerc, Gasly, Sainz, Norris, Verstappen, Hulkenberg, Lawson, Piastri, Ocon, Perez. And in the drop zone, it's Bottas, Russell, Hamilton, Zhou, and Tsunoda. Tsunoda hasn't set a lap time yet that has met the regulations. So Tsunoda will have one final chance. As we're just looking at replays of the Ferraris and Charles Leclerc, who went slightly wide at the penultimate corner and a bit of bodywork came off. Don't know if that was his or something that was already lying there, but Ferrari will, of course, have a check to see. As we're looking now at George Russell on the broadcast, who's on a fresh set of tyres at Mercedes, 17th and 18th. This definitely wasn't part of the plan, but surely they can get themselves out of this. And what I'm looking for here is whether Russell can go quicker than Leclerc and put himself up, quickest or second or whatever he ends up as George Russell starts his final lap of Q1. Slight bit of traffic ahead, but they will get out of the way. And through turn 1, Russell looks good. As he sparks heavily away through the S's. Great rear facing cam. Russell, a decent first sector, not as good as I think maybe you would hope. And Lewis Hamilton matching what Russell has done in the first sector. As Russell opens the DRS And now pounds his way down to turn 12. Hits the apex. What's the lap time looking like? It's a lot better than what he's currently on, obviously, but it's not on the pace of Leclerc. And Lewis Hamilton's had a very poor middle sector. Still up on Alonso, who, of course, is the driver at risk, but poor middle sector there for Hamilton as Max Verstappen now goes quickest onto a 1:33.0. Brilliant lap time for Verstappen, asserting his authority. George Russell goes third, but half a second slower than Verstappen. That is worrying for Mercedes as Lewis Hamilton only goes 16th. And he's out. He's slowed down. That's it. Lewis Hamilton is out in Q1. And even though, yes, yesterday got a bit unlucky with the yellow flag in sprint qualifying, his qualifying troubles continue. I don't think he's ever been knocked out in Q1 here at the US Grand Prix, but it's about to happen as Alex Albon goes up to P12. Yuki Tsunoda, we're just looking at the broadcast, coming towards the end of his lap. Tsunoda currently last because he hasn't done a lap time. Let's hope Tsunoda keeps it within the white lines. As a couple cars just to get about getting out of the way, but that would have distracted Tsunoda. He comes to the line and he goes 7th. We'll see if he keeps that lap time. Hopefully he does. I tell you, Lewis Hamilton might end up last. Or, well, nearly last with that lap time he's done. Liam Lawson up to 3rd. That's definitely good enough for Lawson to get through to Q2. As the checkered flag has now fallen. These are your final laps. As Lance Stroll is now the driver at risk. Fernando Alonso in the drop zone. Can he get out? Yes, he can. For now, Alonso in P10. Zhou Guanyu goes up to 19th. But obviously stays there and is eliminated. And Lewis Hamilton has he had another lap time deletion? That's what they're saying. But we already know he's out in Q1. As Hulkenberg up to 7th. Piastri up to 10th. Kevin Magnussen in the drop zone. He surely can get his way into Q2. That Haas car easily quick enough to do it. As Magnussen through the final couple corners. Can he get through? Yes, he can. He's up to 7th as Valtteri Bottas, by the way, goes ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So Magnussen up to 7th. Lance Stroll up to 15th. As Sergio Perez goes 9th. And that means, sadly, the two Williamses have been knocked out in Q1. What a surprise that is. But the biggest surprise, no doubt, is Lewis Hamilton knocked out in Q1 and is in 19th place. Only a few hundredths ahead of Zhou Guanyu. He was close to being last on the grid. Shocking effort from Hamilton. Whether this is because he's washed or whatever you want to call it, who knows? But what we do know is an absolutely terrible performance from Lewis Hamilton. But that is Q1 over and done with, guys. Let's go through your drivers on their way to Q2. Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Liam Lawson, George Russell, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hulkenberg, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda, Oscar Piastri, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, Lance Stroll, and knocked out in Q1, Alex Albon, Franco Colapinto, Valtteri Bottas, Lewis Hamilton, and Zhou Guanyu. And Q2 will be underway in the next 2 or 3 minutes. But yeah. I mean, we know he's been poor this season, Hamilton, in qualifying, and he's had a few eliminations in Q2 and even, I think, a couple in Q1. But it's still shocking every time it happens because, this is Lewis Hamilton. He is the greatest qualifier of all time. So, again, it's shocking every time it happens because you still think, surely he's got the pace to be here or there or wherever. But many times this season has ended up doing what he's just done there. And yeah, Hamilton, considering where he's qualified, he may as well start from the pit lane tomorrow and just, go for a completely different setup because obviously nothing to lose from where he is on the grid. But yeah, one Mercedes out, and you have to say, Mercedes not as quick so far from what we've seen as we were expecting. So a bit concerned about that. Ferrari are looking good, but Red Bull and Max Verstappen at the minute, to me, look like the clear favourites for pole position. Vettel Hamilton in the chat saying Bottas beats Hamilton. Indeed. Valtteri Bottas outqualifies Lewis Hamilton. And then we're just seeing Hamilton's lap. He did have a bit of traffic on the entry to turn 13, but he already went over the white line on the exit at turn 12, which is why his lap time was deleted. So, in the end, it didn't matter whatever, traffic he may have had. But there's the second cut-off zone. Anyone obviously in between the two dotted lines at the end of Q2 will be out of the session. Q2, a 15-minute long session. I'll sync up the timer at the 14-minute mark. Miss Marquis says the death knock is moving to Ferrari. Just look where Seb and Kimi's careers went when they did it. I'm not sure I'm at the point of calling him the death knock. That's quite an interesting name. But, the more these performances happen, the more you have to ask, is this just, a bad year? Or is this the end of Lewis Hamilton being an elite, level Formula 1 driver? I think we'll find out next year, truly, whether Hamilton is finished or not. I mean, we have to remember, this year in qualifying he's been poor, but he has still won 2 races this year. So, let's not go overboard. Let me see if I can find a couple other comments here. I'm not going to read out that comment from the Woden about all those late nights, but that's a good one. Todd saying Lawson third, holy cow. Yep, brilliant session by him. And he did he race here last year? I'm not sure if he did. I think this might have been the one where Ricciardo came back. I think it was. I think this was the race last year where Ricciardo came back after, obviously, Lawson impressed. So this is the first race weekend for Liam Lawson at the Circuit of the Americas as Q2 has begun. another team to look out for in this session, not in terms of elimination. So there you go, 14 minutes to go in Q2. Yeah, not in terms of elimination, but one team to look out for also is McLaren, because they were not very quick at all in Q1. 10th and 12th they ended up in the end. Obviously, they'll be quicker than that overall for qualifying, but they were nowhere near Verstappen and Leclerc in Q1. So maybe McLaren are holding something back. We'll have to see, but doesn't look good so far from McLaren or Mercedes. And obviously that does benefit Max Verstappen for his championship bid. As we're looking at the onboard of Lando Norris's McLaren, who is in neutral in the pit lane. I don't know if he's just waiting for the queue ahead of him to come out of the pit lane or not, but yeah, just in neutral there. I do like the special livery McLaren have gone with. They've gone with a load more chrome. Obviously, we do love the old chrome McLaren liveries. I wish they would go fully back to a chrome livery, because it was just, yeah, fantastic. Those days, the Vodafone McLaren days. But nice of McLaren to do these special liveries that they do quite often at this point. Red Bull were going to do a special livery here themselves, but dropped it because, was it here or Singapore? It was one of the two. They were going to do a special livery, but they dropped it because they needed all the weight, or less weight they needed, because it was going to add more weight to the car. And with how they've been as of late, they needed all the performance they could, as Max Verstappen does a brilliant 24.9 for the first sector, which is not the absolute best you can do in the first sector, but it's still pretty quick. But the best time I think to look out for this session is probably about what Max Verstappen did yesterday in sprint qualifying, a 1:32.8, maybe a 32.7 at best. As Max Verstappen, obviously purple for the middle sector as well. And the Red Bull visibly just looks more hooked up. Front to rear, it looks connected again. When, if we go back to Monza a few weeks ago, this car looked hopeless to drive. The rear end was incredibly snappy, but not the case anymore, as Max Verstappen repeats the lap time he did in Q1, a 1:33.0. And that might be with a scrub set of tyres. And if that is, then that is incredibly impressive. As Sergio Perez goes second on a 1:33.4, which is okay. Nothing special. As here comes the Spaniard, Carlos Sainz. Started on pole here a couple years ago until he was typhooned by George Russell. Sainz just about creeps ahead of Perez for second. As here comes Pierre Gasly, who goes second on a 1:33.4. Gasly, of course, was super quick in Q1 and still is. Here comes Charles Leclerc. Slow lap time, 1:34.0, probably on a scrub set of tyres for that run, because that is almost a second slower than he went in Q1. Esteban Ocon has done a purple middle sector. As Lance Stroll goes up to P5. Aston Martin still haven't shown any pace with their new upgrades, which is not a surprise at this point. Esteban Ocon goes 5th. And talking of Aston Martin, here comes Fernando Alonso, who, of course, has never won here. And Alonso understeering like a trolley through the penultimate corner and nearly getting his lap time deleted. But still ends up ahead of Lance Stroll by a couple hundredths of a second. So Alonso up to 6th. Tsunoda 5th. Good lap for him. Nico Hulkenberg now up to P5, continuing the very strong pace of that Haas car. And so is Kevin Magnussen, who goes 6th. 5th and 6th for the two Haases. Here comes Lando Norris, who's done a purple middle sector and goes quickest on a 1:32.8. And McLaren have arrived to the party, as Oscar Piastri goes 3rd, only slightly slower than Max Verstappen. So there you go. McLaren are here as George Russell goes 4th. Mercedes not quite here like they were yesterday. But with 7.5 minutes to go, let's go through the current order. So on their way to Q3, it is Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, and Tsunoda. And in the dropout zone, Ocon, Alonso, Stroll, Leclerc, and Lawson. Leclerc obviously was on a scrub set of tyres on that occasion, as we're looking at a McLaren, I think, of Lando Norris, who's just doing an in-lap back to the pits. But yeah, until we see what Max is going to respond with, that is McLaren, like I said, arriving to the party. Make sure, by the way, as we've not got that long to go until the end of Q2, to vote in the poll running in the chat, where I've asked you guys who will take pole position for the US Grand Prix. Just over 200 votes we've had, and you guys have got probably another 10 to 15 minutes to decide, if you haven't already, who you think will take pole. By the way, we're on 37 likes. Let's try and get up to 40 likes if we can in the next 5 minutes. Just 3 more likes to get to that. As a lot of Australians at the, or not a lot, but a few at the Grand Prix. Obviously, Piastri has definitely earned himself a lot of new fans recently. As we're looking at the Ferrari of Leclerc, who looks like he's going to be coming out on track pretty soon. They don't want to come out too soon, though, because they don't want to, if Leclerc doesn't do the greatest lap, obviously the cars after him will have more or better grip for their laps and might end up going quicker. Max Verstappen, though, saying that, is on an outlap. Tsunoda saying on the radio, tell to Liam when he gives me the slipstream, stay in the middle and go to the left at the end of the straight. I was picking up so much dust in the straight. Well, hopefully they can communicate that. Interesting that they're doing the giving each other the toe. Not really something that has been done in the last couple years here, because there's never really been a team that's been that slow in a straight line where they've needed to do that. So, yeah, interesting. As all the cars, not all the cars, but a lot of the cars, filtering their way back onto the racetrack. And the car to look out for, of course, the Ferrari of Leclerc. Can he get himself into Q3? Surely he can. And then it's a battle really between Tsunoda, Ocon, Alonso, Stroll, and Lawson as to who will make Q3 alongside the two Haas's, who you would imagine will get through to Q3. I certainly hope they do. Haas have been brilliant this weekend, obviously at their home Grand Prix. Yeah, it's been a brilliant week for Haas, considering they've been, announcing that new technical partnership with Toyota, which could lead to some great things in the future. And the last couple cars, it looks like on track will be the two Aston Martins, as it's getting late in the day here in Austin. Local time, it's 5:37 p.m., which this time of year, getting a bit chilly probably for the locals. As here comes the Monegasque, who took pole here at the Circuit of Americas last year. And he's trying to get himself now into Q3, and surely he will do so. He's an absolute master of the qualifying lap, is Leclerc. And yeah, first sector is decent. But again, the middle sector is really where the Ferrari is at its best. As into turn 11, he kisses the apex nicely. And now onto the back straight. As Max Verstappen goes back to the top of the timesheets on a 1:32.5. That is very quick. Half a second he improved by there, Verstappen. And a quarter of a second clear now of Lando Norris, who is still in the pit lane. As Leclerc is going to get himself into Q3, just don't know exactly where as of yet. Sergio Perez looks like he's probably going to put himself into the top 5, maybe, with the lap he's doing. He's done the first 2 sectors of his final lap in Q2. Here comes Leclerc, who goes up to third on a 1:32.9, which is a good lap. Here is Sergio Perez through the final corner. And a 33.0 for Perez. He goes fourth. That's definitely good enough for the Mexican, who will have plenty of fans here in Austin to get through. As we're looking at Pierre Gasly fighting his car. He's doing such a great job. Currently in the top 10. If he can get through the Q3, that would be easily one of the drives of the day. As Tsunoda goes up to 9th. And Gasly through the final corner. Can he improve on P7? No, he can't, but he improves his lap time to a 1:33.1. That might be enough. We'll have to find out. As Carlos Sainz behind him in 8th. What does he do? He goes up to 2nd. What an improvement. Quarter of a second down on Verstappen. So Gasly now down to 8th. As we're looking at Gasly's teammate Ocon in 12th. Not sure if this is going to put him in the top 10. It doesn't. Ocon misses out and is only P11. Nico Hülkenberg now comes through the final corner in P10. Surely he can get himself through. He's in 10th for now, but he's not improved his lap time. I think Hülkenberg might be at serious risk of being eliminated. And yes, he's been eliminated because Kevin Magnussen, his teammate, has gone up to 9th. As the checkered flag has now fallen. And now it's all down to whether the two Aston Martins can end up in the top 10. Lawson has not done a lap time because he's got a grid penalty, which I forgot to tell you guys about, which is carried over from the Daniel Ricciardo era, sadly for him. But Alonso through the final corner. Can he scrape his way into the top 10? Yes, he can. Alonso up to 9th. And Lance Stroll might be able to make it a double Q3 appearance. As Stroll to the line. Only 14th. Poor final sector and poor effort there from Stroll. But Fernando Alonso once again proving why he's still such a great driver. Because that Aston Martin car has not been good this weekend. Yet he has dragged it up to 9th and into the top 10. But there you go, guys. That's Q2 over and done with. And let's go through your drivers that are going into the shootout of Q3. Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Pierre Gasly. What a job by him. Easily one of the drivers of the day. Fernando Alonso and Kevin Magnussen. And eliminated guys in Q2. Yuki Tsunoda, Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, Lance Stroll, and Liam Lawson. As we're saying, the reason why Hulkenberg was eliminated, he locked up at turn 1, lost, probably about half a second. So would have made it through. But even if he had made it through, that would have eliminated his teammate. So ultimately, only one Haas gets through, which is a surprise. I was certain that both Haases would get through. But yeah, a messy end to Q2. But now it's all about Q3, which will be getting underway in about just under 5 minutes from now. 12-minute long session. Of course, I'll sync it up at the 11-minute mark for the timer. But couple more minutes to go, guys, for you to get your votes in. And actually, I'm going to end the poll now because it's pretty clear, looking at the poll, who has won the poll. So let me finish that. So 203 votes. Thanks for voting, guys, on the poll where I've asked you guys who will take pole position for the United States Grand Prix. And 64% of you guys have gone for Max Verstappen. And I agree. I think he will get pole. 27% have gone for Lando Norris. 7% for George Russell. And just 1% for Oscar Piastri. Yeah, going into this Q3, I think Max Verstappen is the clear favourite for pole. Whoever ends up on the front row with him, though, is still very much up in the air. It could be McLaren. It could be Ferrari. I don't think it will be Russell and the Mercedes because Mercedes, for some reason, don't have the pace they did yesterday. I don't know if it's because of the track temperature. I do know it is a bit warmer today than it was yesterday, which might be why that is. Because we have seen with Mercedes, and we saw this especially in Canada where they were so quick, and Silverstone, that in colder conditions, Mercedes tend to be quicker. And obviously, if the temperature increases from one day to the next, that's going to hurt a team like Mercedes that reacts to, temperature in that way. So, yeah, not great. But, yeah, I'm pretty confident Max Verstappen takes pole here. Lando Norris, though, must at least qualify second. Because we know the record that second place has off the start line of getting into the lead at turn 1. And I think even last year, Lando Norris started from second and got into the lead on the first corner. So even he knows how important it is, and he has to make sure that he's on the front row. If he's if he's third or fourth on the grid and Max is on pole, that championship is going to be slipping away. as Lewis Hamilton is answering questions by the looks of it in the media pod, and looks not angry or anything, but he just looks fed up because it's just the same thing over and over again. Just very disappointing qualifying performance compared to what he probably could have done. But now we wait. And with Max Verstappen doing a 1:32.5 in Q2, which was a stunning lap time, I have to say, I think Max could get into the 1:31s. He might just be able to do it. I still don't think he will, but it's possible. From what I've seen so far, I think it's possible. I don't think he'll do it. I think he'll just miss out. Probably do like a 1:32.1 or maybe a late 1:32.0. But put it this way, if Max on his first lap in Q3 does a 1:31.9, then that is game, set, and match there and then. Nobody is getting close to that. But we'll find out whether he, of course, can do that. One more like, by the way, until we're on 40 likes. So let's try and get it to that. The Woden says, I think Mercedes had to change the setup because of the tyre wear in the sprint. Maybe. And maybe that will pay them back tomorrow. I hope it does. But the thing is if Russell ends up like 7th on the grid, which is possible here, he might not be able to utilize that better race setup from, being so much lower on the grid than he could have been if he had gone for a bit more of a qualifying setup, if you know what I mean. So, got to be careful, Mercedes. And talking of Russell, he's one of the first cars on track as the session has begun. And yeah, I'd say between a 1:31.9 and a 1:32.1 is where I think pole position will be. Most likely a 32.0 or 32.1. Again, I would be amazed if we get a 1:31 lap time. That would be extra special. And honestly, I want to see that. I want to see whether it's Verstappen or whoever doing a 1:31, because that would really set the bar high. I've accidentally missed the syncing up point. Sorry about that. I'll make sure to do it at the 10-minute mark, which is in about 45 seconds from now. But Lando Norris, I think we're looking at on the broadcast. And again, front row is possible for Lando. He just needs to produce the best lap he possibly can. And if it's good enough, then great. If it's not, then at least, he can blame it on the car not being as quick. But one thing Lando must absolutely do in this session is the best possible lap he can do. As there you go. 10 minutes remain in qualifying. As McLaren tell Lando, trust the car, don't overload combined. Don't know what that means. The lap time will be in your hands, I think that is what they said. Trying to relax and calm Lando down. We know he does get very nervous before these big moments, which is a big contributing factor to why he's thrown away so many points. But there's still time to win this championship, especially if he can produce his best form. Lando Norris begins his first attempt at pole position and already is into the S's. What's the first sector? It's a 24.9, which is good, but it's not as good as it maybe needs to be if it's going to be pole position. As Norris gets through turn 10. All good. And now blasts his way down to turn 12. And the car, handling-wise, looking good, but it's all about what the stopwatch says at the end of the day. And yeah, this lap from Lando, again, it looks good. But whether it is good is another story, as Kevin Magnussen has done the first lap time. And note, George Russell now goes even quicker. A 1:32.9 for Russell, which is pretty slow. Lando Norris, a 1:32.3, which is, it's good, but it's not great. As Piastri goes 0.6 of a second slower than his teammate, but it is still second for now. As Carlos Sainz goes second. Here comes Leclerc, who goes up to third. Second and third for Ferrari, but Max Verstappen is out there and going quickly. How quick can he go, though? As he comes through to the couple final corners. And Max Verstappen, a bit of understeer through the final corner. And he goes second. Not a good enough lap there for Verstappen. Definitely can do better than that. But he goes up to second. Only 0.03 of a second behind Norris. Sergio Perez only goes 8th. As Pierre Gasly, by the way, is in 7th place. And is only... He's only 0.07 of a second away from being 5th, is Pierre Gasly. What a performance by him. But with one final run to go, it is Lando Norris on provisional pole. Here's a replay. He was so close to going over the track limits of the penultimate corner, but just kept it on the white line. And like I said, it was a good lap from Lando, but it wasn't a great lap. And that's why I still feel, even though Max Verstappen has gone second, I still think Max Verstappen can go quite a bit quicker. Because, Max did a 1:32.5. As Perez has had a lap time deleted, so Magnussen now up to 8th. Max did a 1:32.5 in Q2, and he's only gone 0.2 of a second quicker. He can gain more than that. I'm pretty confident of that. So this is not over. But it sure does make things exciting for this final run that's going to come up in 3 or 4 minutes' time. As it looks like we've got a legit fight for pole between the two championship rivals, Verstappen and Norris. As now we're looking at Fernando Alonso on the broadcast, who's going for his only run in Q3, whilst everyone's still in the pits. And for Alonso, the aim has got to be ahead of Gasly. Gasly, though, to be fair, it's not that far away from Russell and Piastri. So if Alonso can do that, Alonso might be able to put himself up in the top 5, which would be quite remarkable. as Alonso 3/10 off Norris in the first sector, which is as expected given what we've seen this weekend between McLaren and Aston Martin. The middle sector, though, has been Aston Martin's strongest part of the lap this weekend, surprisingly. As Alonso down into turn 12. I think he did go a bit wide there. He's now 3/4 of a second off Norris, and this will probably put Alonso up to 8th ahead of Magnussen. I'd be very surprised if he can put himself ahead of Gasly. And you'd have to say Alpine, with their upgrades, have got it right. Because Gasly, right up there, where we didn't expect him to be. As Alonso through the final corner, what can he do? He does indeed go up to 8th place, but I would be surprised if he stayed there. And yeah, I could easily see Alonso dropping to P10. But now, with just under 3 minutes remaining, we turn our attention now to the fight for pole position, and your main contenders are out there on their outlaps. And like I said, this is, for me, between Norris and Verstappen. Ferrari are looking good, 3rd and 4th on the grid, but I don't think Ferrari have got the pace to be on pole. But for me, again, if Max can produce as, oh, that's an unsafe release. And Max, did he have to touch the pit wall there to get out of the way of the McLaren? I think he did. And that was Gasly in the Alpine. Hope that hasn't damaged the Red Bull. Very unsafe release by Alpine. But as I was saying, if Verstappen can produce the best lap he possibly can do, then I think that will be good enough for pole. It's in Max's hands, this pole position. But that does not mean he's going to get it. But he is the best driver in the world for a reason. Because he produces when it matters so often. And is your 3-time world champion. 3 consecutive world championships. Looking for his 4th in these next few weeks. And if he does get pole here and win this weekend, he'll feel as though he's got one hand on the trophy. As he begins his final attempt at pole position in Texas. Let's see what the first sector's like as he comes through the S's. Sparking away. And oh, it's a good first sector. Nearly 2/10 up on Lando Norris. Can he keep up that momentum for the rest of the lap as Norris is about to come through to the first sector time beam? And Norris doesn't improve on what he did previously. So not a great start for Lando. As Verstappen powers his way down to turn 12, that is a sinking corner. Oh, yellow flag in sector 3. And that is going to be a red flag. And that is going to cost Max Verstappen the chance to get pole. And it's George Russell who's in the barriers at, I think it is the penultimate corner. And that is qualifying over and done with. So Lando Norris, very luckily, has took pole position for the US Grand Prix. George Russell is okay, by the way. We'll see a replay of what happened to him in a moment. But that is a annoying end to qualifying. We were in for a great final lap there between Verstappen and Norris and the Ferraris, but Russell put it in the wall. But it benefits Lando Norris because he is on pole for the 4th time in the last 5 races. So Lando Norris takes pole ahead of Max Verstappen in 2nd. Carlos Sainz is 3rd. Leclerc 4th. Piastri 5th. Russell 6th. Pierre Gasly 7th on the grid. And for me, Pierre Gasly, driver of the day. Fernando Alonso remains in 8th with Magnussen 9th. Perez in 10th. And then the rest of the order, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Ocon, Stroll, Lawson, Albon, Colapinto, Bottas, Hamilton, and Zhou. One thing this does mean, though, given that I think Red Bull are quicker than McLaren, is it makes tomorrow's race even more interesting with Max in the quicker car behind Lando in the McLaren. But yeah, an anticlimax there to end, unfortunately. But we're used to it. It does happen sometimes. And here's a replay of Russell, and the rear end just stepped out. He probably did turn in a bit too aggressively to the penultimate corner for what the car was capable of. But yeah, that was a big snap. But luckily, he is okay. So, before I go, because it is late, I'm not going to be around for that long, let me just ask you guys, who is your driver of the day for qualifying in Texas? And your options for driver of the day will be Lando Norris, obviously, for taking pole. I'll put Max Verstappen in there because I think overall for the day he performed well. Carlos Sainz is one driver we should not forget to shout out. Great performance by him, out qualifying his teammate, and a great performance earlier in finishing ahead of Leclerc in the sprint race. And Pierre Gasly, who again, for me, Pierre Gasly is driver of the day. 7th on the grid. Something Alpine have not had in a while. So I'll let you guys vote on that for a couple minutes. And then we'll get to the results, and then we'll come to the end of the stream. Remember though, guys, I will be back tomorrow live at 6 p.m. UK time for the United States Grand Prix race watch-along, where we'll be live for 2 hours of build-up, then watch along the race, and then a bit of a reaction afterwards. And then, of course, on Monday, I'll upload my podcast, 10th episode of the podcast it'll be, reviewing the US Grand Prix. Ruxpert says, Gasly drive the day in that Timu McLaren. The Woden says, George still obliterated, hashtag blessed. It is remarkable how Mercedes' weekend has fallen apart. 6th and 19th on the grid when they could have been on the front row after sprint qualifying. The possibility was there. And even Russell said on the radio after at the end of Q2, I didn't read it out at the time, but he said he can't believe the difference between yesterday and today. But again, that could be the temperature difference. Looney Classic says Lando has to lead into the first corner to stand a chance. Absolutely. If Max overtakes... oh my god. Just see something on Twitter there's... Wow. What do you call it? If Max overtakes Lando at turn 1, then I think it's like, race over at that point. But we will see. I'll let you guys vote on that poll quick. Todd says Max didn't have to fully show his hand. McLaren, I think they're smart enough to know that Red Bull are quicker and that they are not the favorites. Sorry, just bit my lip there. They are not the favorites to win tomorrow. I think they're smart enough to know that. The data is there, slapping them in the face. I mean, we saw the sprint race. Red Bull were the quickest team in the sprint. So we've already had a spoiler as to what the race pace will be. So, I think with Max, it's going to be a relaxing day for him in a sense, because all the pressure's on Lando, who's on pole, just ahead of him, because obviously Lando needs to catch Max. But Max knows he has the faster car, and as long as Max is at least second at the end of the first lap, he knows he's got the faster car and he's got 55, 56 laps to eventually catch and pass Lando Norris, which he will eventually probably do. So, no pressure for Verstappen. It's all on Lando Norris. This year's a write-off year for Merck, very poor. There's been some good moments this year to build on. Obviously, a couple or 3 race wins for them, but they do feel quite a long time ago, those race wins. That's how quickly Formula One changes. Back then, we were bashing Ferrari for how shit they were and praising Mercedes, and now it's the opposite way round. And that's the one thing I've loved about the second half of this season with having 4 front-running teams, is that the pecking order is different every weekend. It's constantly moving around. That's what you want. You don't want it to just be the same. The Woda says Lando flukes the pole and acts like the yellow flag didn't gift it to him. I mean, technically, you don't know. Maybe Lando would have ended up on pole. Maybe he would have done a good enough lap. But I think if there wasn't the yellow flag, I think Max takes pole by probably a couple tenths of a second. But I think I'll finish up the results of the poll. And we've had, 10 votes. And the drive for the day that you guys have gone for is Max Verstappen on 40%, and then 20% for all the rest. Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, and Pierre Gasly. I still think Gasly, driver of the day, but your guys' opinion is your guys' opinion. But that's it for qualifying, guys. Thank you for coming along. I know it's obviously very late for a lot of us in Europe. So yeah, thanks for coming along and being dedicated. That's it's been great to have you along for that. But of course, there is a race tomorrow, which I will be around for. So make sure to come along at 6 p.m. UK time for the start of our race build-up. And then, obviously, the race starts at 8 p.m. UK time and then runs probably until about 10 p.m. So yeah, make sure to come along for the race watch along tomorrow, starting at 6 p.m. UK time. Before you go, make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel, and make sure to smash the like button if you haven't already, and check out some of the latest videos on the channel. Make sure that as well to join our Discord server. Link below in the description and probably in the chat as well. Sorry about that. Yeah, make sure to do all those things. And like I said, support the channel in whatever way you choose to. But guys, that's it for qualifying until the main event tomorrow. What's promising to be a great race in Austin, Texas. I'll be back live tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time for tomorrow's Grand Prix. And until then, it's been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.